would be more likely to go for this light than these people would. And this is because these people think themselves wise, and they live relatively what kind of lives? They live, what I would call pleasant lives. They've got stuff. They're respected and honored, that kind of thing. They fancy themselves kings of the cave, but all they believe that exists is the cave. That prisoner might try to make the arduous journey to try to get out of the cave. She may spend her entire life trying to do it. She may not even make it out of the cave. I could have said this about myself just as easily. I know that Plato is right on one level, but I just can't what? I can't convince myself of it on certain levels. I can appreciate that there are certain things that are fundamentally true that aren't a matter of what? I recognize that there are things that are true that are not merely opinion. And I'll talk about this more when I put up the divided line. But let me give you a couple of examples now. Plato is extremely fond of providing mathematical examples to try to illustrate the fact that there are truths that are not merely a matter of opinion. And if I can make you the most mundane of mathematical drawings right here, folks. Here's our good friend, a line segment. Here's another good friend, a line segment. We all know that this entire distance right here is how many degrees? We all know that the entire distance from here to here is 180 degrees. All the way around the circle would be 360. But this line segment right here, in total, is 180 degrees. Now, granted, we could have defined 180 degrees by some other number if we broke it up into more chunks. Because the actual number is arbitrary. But there is a fact about how much of an angle that is, regardless of what number we called it. Now, suppose that I told you that this angle right here is x degrees. You could tell me without any hesitation what this is. And don't say why. The answer is what? It's 180 minus x. And you can know that for 100% certain. And using reason, because this is 180 minus x, this must be x also. And if this is x, this must also be 180 minus x. And you'll notice this was probably how in geometry you derived that corollary about complementary angles. Now that's going way back. But you'll notice we derived those truths through what? We derived that through reason alone. If you clearly understand the concept of a triangle, you know that the sum of these three angles will always be what? And it's not a matter of opinion. The sum total of those three angles will be 180 degrees. And if you didn't remember that because geometry was ancient history, sorry for the example. But yeah, it's not a matter of opinion. Give you another one. examples, the fact that there are logical truths that are not merely a matter of opinion is also another signpost to help you to get out of the cave. This is the way a logician would symbolize the statement. If it is the case that P, it is also the case that Q. Now suppose my second premise is, if it's the case that Q, therefore it's the case that R. Can anyone guess what further proposition I can derive from that? Yeah. Therefore, if it's P, then it's also R. That is a deductive rule that we call the hypothetical syllogism. That is a deductive truth that you can derive through reason alone. And it doesn't matter what the P, Q's, and R are, because they're like numbers, they are merely placeholders. The journey out of the cave is making the discovery that there are certain things that are true independent of our perception. Now, if you are able to realize this, you might never fully make it out of the cave, but at least you're being pointed where? Yeah, you're being pointed in the right direction. That's supposed to be an H, sorry. Now, of course, the final part of the journey, which very few people will ever achieve, is to get outside of the cave. Now, Plato has Socrates describing this extremely clearly. The person who makes it outside of the cave at first will be what? Blinded. It's as if she would be blinded. And this is because the light is what? Too bright. The light is far too bright for her. Remember, she has been accustomed to the dim light of the cave. And when she's finally coming to appreciate what? When she finally comes to apprehend reality, it is too awesome and too bright for her. This is why at first she may have to hide her eyes from it so she doesn't become blinded by it. And this is why Plato will describe the person as having to slowly acclimate herself to it. By first looking at the reflected light of the sun via the moon in a pool of water. So she only experiences it how? Yeah, she'll experience it more dimly as she acclimates herself to it. And then she'll be able to handle the reflected light of the moon unabated by other reflections until she's able to grasp the full light of the sun. Now, after she has done this, she will have difficulty giving what to her experiences? The answer there is words. And this is because ultimate reality is too awesome for words. She will have an intuitive grasp of true reality, but she will have difficulty articulating it. But she will not want to keep it to whom? She won't want to keep it to herself. And folks, this is basically the narrative of just about every great Enlightenment story. The enlightened person doesn't remain outside of the cave. She goes back down into the cave. Yes?
Would this be like Socrates being the gadfly?
Yeah, precisely. This is like Socrates going back down into the cave to try to unshackle these people. And guess what? Some of them listened to him.
People casting shadows.
Yeah. Yeah, many of these people, of course, will not be very happy with him. Some of these people won't be either because, yeah, some people end up being, you know, that cliche about happiness in their slavery. You know, the person who tries to unshackle them might actually be perceived as the bad guy, perceived as the enemy. And this is why Socrates, or Plato has Socrates saying near the end of the allegory of the cave, that eventually this person who came back down into the cave to try to bring people out of the cave, eventually what happens to him? Oh, the answer is he gets killed. They kill him. This shouldn't surprise you as the end to this story, because it was the end to whose story? Socrates. Yeah, this was the end to Socrates' story. He knows that enlightenment is too awesome to keep to himself. You have this kind of metaphor about bringing people out of enlightenment, or I mean, bringing people out of the darkness into enlightenment from a whole lot of different religious as well as enlightenment traditions. So this way of talking about enlightenment should not surprise you very much. Now, to put one more thing on the board before we take a couple of questions. Anyone my unofficial timekeeper?
41.
41. Perfect. Now, folks, this is one rendering of the divided line that's actually quite similar to the one that you find in your textbook. These two levels are not reality. These are merely our apprehension or awareness of the sensible world. According to Plato, those people dwelling in the cave are at this level of awareness are not experiencing reality. We are merely experiencing what he would call the realm of appearances. In the realm of appearances, things are constantly changing. And in the realm of appearances, the truth would appear to be what? What would appear to be a physical thing, and it would also appear to be relative. But here's what Plato argues. The people who mistake appearance for reality aren't actually seeing reality. It is the person who begins to make her way out of the cave. This is the area of the divided line that is consistent with the person trying to journey out of the cave. It is the person who realizes that there are certain things that are true through the clear light of reason that transcend mere opinion. And this is where mathematical examples can help. This is where examples of logic can help us. They can help us to see that there are things that are absolutely true that are not merely a matter of appearance, and that they are known through which of our faculties? Not through our senses, but through our rational minds. Now, folks, this is an awareness that there are rational truths. But it is not the highest level of awareness. The person who comes out into the clear light of day experiences the reality of what are referred to as Plato's forms. And you'll see I have them listed here as Plato's higher forms. And just to give you some other language for talking about it, I sometimes like to refer to them as Plato's abstract absolutes. I like to refer to this level as Plato's concrete absolutes. Any guess why I call them his concrete absolutes? Yeah, Mr. Moxo.
Because we can, understand it.
Yeah, well, we can actually construct physical representations of it. You'll notice I gave you a geometrical drawing on the board here that could help us to think meaningfully about it. But it was merely to do what for you? Yeah, for purpose of helping you to focus your mind in the right direction. In other words, we can construct drawings of triangles for helping us to think about triangles. We can represent logical arguments with symbols to help us to meaningfully think about them. This is not quite the case with Plato's higher forms. Plato's higher forms are the highest of ideas, and they are abstract ideas that are pretty much impossible to do what with? To represent them or even to fully define them. And this is because they are too awesome for words, not to sound too cliche about it. But the highest of all forms, according to Plato, is the form of the what? The answer to that question was the form of the good. The form of the good in the allegory of the cave is symbolized by the what? There you go, because I have a slight sense of humor. Yeah. The form of the good is symbolized by the sun. And this is why you'll see the phrase for it is the simile of the sun. Now, of course, the form of the good is not the same as the sun, but it is supposed to point us into a way of looking at it, a comparison. Just like the sun can bring us into the light, just like the sun is one of the givers of life. These are things that are all true of the Platonic form of the good. And from the form of the good comes all of the other higher forms. And let me give you a short list of them. Truth, beauty, love, and justice. And by the way, all of these different forms that I listed here, these end up being the subjects of many of Plato's dialogues. Now, the interesting thing about all of these things right here that Plato would call the higher forms, they are things that the sophists would say, what about?
Relative.
Yeah, they're relative. These are just a matter of opinion, man. Isn't it all whatever you think about it? Isn't the way you define justice just the way you define justice? And this thing, love, aren't there many different ways of talking about love, and isn't that all relative? Well, Socrates and Plato say no. For the person who has become enlightened, you don't end up having a full-blown understanding of these things, but you do come to have a better idea of what they are. You come to have a better idea of what they are not. And you also come to have an appreciation for the fact that these higher things are things that we finite human beings will never be able to fully comprehend or understand. We can't even fully define them. But one of the things that people like Socrates and Plato think that we can do is that we can point. We can point people towards an intuitive understanding of them. And we do so partly by using Socratic method to show which are the wrong definitions, hopefully getting closer to a right understanding, but also by using metaphor and allegory to point people towards them. The good is not literally the sun. But talking about it as being like the sun is a way of trying to point a person towards it. Or by talking in metaphor about justice, which I'm going to talk about first thing next time, is another way of trying to point towards an understanding of justice. Cheers until later.